Thank you for joining us. We're just going to give folks a minute or two to get connected and then we'll get started.
Thank you for joining us all. We really appreciate your interest in our webinar series. Um, my name is Scott Barton. I am the Director of Tribal Initiatives here at the Suicide Prevention Resource Center. I am also an enrolled member of the Mashantucket Pequot Tribe in Connecticut, and I also have Mohawk ancestry. I'm very grateful to be here to lead this team and the work that we do here at SPRC. We're grateful for you to be joining us. We are excited to bring this to us. And most importantly, we're excited to share this with you. A little bit of housekeeping. If you can make sure that you keep yourselves muted, please, except for the question and answer session. If you have any questions that you have during the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat. And running tech for us today is one of our wonderful colleagues, Colleen Solitis. She will handle all your tech needs. We'll put a message in there with her information if you run into some technical issues. Please feel free to email her. She'll be helping us out. And without further ado, I would like to introduce the main presenter today, which will be Angie Mize. She is our Tribal Initiatives Coordinator, but she's so much more than that. She is absolutely a powerhouse. So happy to have her on our team. And without further ado, Angie.
Thank you, Scott. Hello, everybody, new friends and old friends. Thank you so much for joining us today on this webinar. I'm just so happy to have you here and thankful that you're spending a little bit of your afternoon with us. So today's webinar, we are going to be talking about grief in Native communities. Our first webinar will be centering Indigenous perspectives. And a little bit about our funding and disclaimer. The Suicide Prevention Resource Center is supported by a grant from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Administration, SAMHSA, under this grant number. The views, opinions, and content expressed in this product do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of HHS, SAMHSA, or CMHS. Next slide, please. And a little bit about SPRC. The Suicide Prevention Resource Center, SPRC, advances effective suicide prevention nationwide through free consultation, training, and tools for community organizations and coalitions, workplaces, state and tribal leaders, health behavioral health systems, professional and professional education programs, and national public and private partners. SPRC is supported through a grant from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration. Next slide, please. Okay, well, hello, everybody. I am so happy to see you. At this time, we would like you all to just introduce yourself. If you could just put your name and your tribe or organization, and then also what state you live in the chat, just so we can get to know everybody a little bit. I'm sorry that I did not think of a better icebreaker. I should have thought of that. But my name is Angie Mize, and like Scott said, I am the Tribal Initiatives Coordinator for SPRC, and I am currently living in Oklahoma. Except for I have some family members that are moving to Colorado soon, and the more I look into it, the more I'm tempted to go. So if you live in Colorado, give me some pointers. And we'll just give folks a little bit to put that in. Oh, I see some from Alaska. So good morning to you. It is not afternoon. Thank you for joining. All over Michigan, New Hampshire. Thank you so much. Well, I'll go ahead and continue and you can keep putting those in there. I'm going to turn this over to Scott once again to talk just a little bit about SPRC initiatives as a whole.
Thank you, Angie. So SPRC, we do have a tribal initiatives team, but overall, As Angie said, um, we are the federally funded uh, Suicide Resource Center. Um, and as such, we have different departments that we have under our SPRC umbrella that are here to help. So even though this is specifically a tribal webinar, we'd like to introduce you to some of the other folks and initiatives in here. Some of our staff are also on this call from our other initiatives. So it's great that they support us, and we want you to know they're also here to support you. So we'll start with our workplace initiative. And the workplace initiatives helps employees build comprehensive mental health, suicide prevention, and post-prevention programs. They help to reduce stigma, train employees and managers to help foster a supportive, recovery-ready work environment. So they're here to assist in some of those high professional areas, like maybe construction, farming, areas like that, that tend to have higher suicide rates than some of the others that we see. Next would be our lived experience initiative team. And they center lived experience across all of our suicide prevention efforts. They engage a group of leaders with suicide-centered experience and develop and share effective lived experience practices. They are a fantastic team, and we just love that we get to work with them also. Next will be our community initiative, and they provide resources to help communities strengthen their resource. It says suicide prevention efforts with a focus on cultural relevance and centering perspectives of lived experience. So as you can see, there's some overlap and collaboration that our teams tend to do. We also work with Action Alliance, so that's our public and private policy section. And the National Action Alliance brings public and private sector leaders to champion suicide prevention as a national priority. And they catalyze efforts to implement the national strategy and cultivate resources and sustain progress. Next is our best practice registry, our BPR. And this is extremely helpful when you're looking for things that are not only best practice, but have been vetted for your suicide prevention needs. So they manage and curate the best practice registry, the nation's designated library, if you will, of suicide prevention programs and interventions. And they incorporate best practices, national frameworks, and culturally relevant approaches. So check that out if you get a chance. It's a fantastic resource. Next is our healthcare initiative. And they enhance capacity of healthcare workers and health systems to prevent suicide through training, tools, resources based on research and best practices, and also TTA. State and territories team. They provide technical assistance to help establish suicide prevention infrastructure across the United States and territories through evaluation, specialized supports, tailored guidance, and also trainings. And then our favorite one, but don't tell the rest of our initiatives. Please advance the slide, Colleen. Will be our tribal initiatives team. We provide training and technical assistance to tribal suicide prevention efforts to build capacity for appropriate and relevant suicide prevention and postvention and crisis care for tribal communities and those that actually serve tribal communities and tribal people. Next slide, please. And I will turn it back over to your wonderful presenter today,
Thank
Angie.
you so much, Scott. And then also, if you have questions throughout this presentation, don't hesitate to put them in the chat, and then we will get to those at the Q&A at the very end, and we'll get to those questions. So this is why we are here today. So today we are going to talk about grieving practices within American Indian and Alaska Native communities. Observing traditional grief practices have been shown to be a protective factor against suicide among AI and people. Many tribes continue to pass down knowledge of these practices. So today we're going to be talking about types of grief, community-centered grieving, specific community roles in grief practices, and ceremonial protocols, and then the role of community in navigating various types of grief. And then for the majority of this presentation, I will be swapping between using the terms native and tribal while speaking about communities. And that's because abbreviations make me stumble. And so I will have to stumble if I keep continuing to say AIAN. Working in this field, we all know that we use a lot of abbreviations, and so I'm just going to stop myself from that. Thank you. So our journey today, this will be our agenda. We will probably spend about 10 to 15 minutes on these sections, and then have ample time at the end for questions. Next slide, please. So the roots. So following the formation of several suicide clusters that occurred within Indian country, our team realized that there just wasn't enough resources available to help communities recover from traumatic deaths and prevent complicated grief. And so these lack of resources led us to create SPRC's Grief and Native Communities Summit. The goal of having our summit, which we had last June, it was to understand how Native communities heal, so that we could know how to better help in the response of traumatic death. The summit was used for us to build foundational knowledge of existing tribally centered suicide prevention resources, and then to help develop recommendations to address the next steps for suicide prevention needs. So the summit, we brought together approximately 50 individuals from across Turtle Island, and they participated in focus groups over a 3-day period that examine commonalities and differences in traditional grieving practices. And I see a couple on here today, and it makes me so happy. I'm not going to call you out, but I see you. So thank you for joining us so much. Um, we had this summit, I said last June, and we held it at the Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Cultural Center, which is in Mashantucket, Connecticut. And we were lucky enough that is Scott, our fearless leaders, that is his tribal lands. And so it was a great experience to go and spend time with his community throughout that time. And then when we were bringing together these individuals, we really had a mix of regionally urban. We had a mix of elders and youth, natural helpers, and public health workers. We had some tribal community leaders. We had elected tribal officials, spiritual leaders, cultural keepers, and language keepers were the categories of folks that we had join us at that summit. So throughout those 3 days, it was just deep engagement, participation. The participants courageously shared stories of personal loss and traditions, and just layered grief. And so, with their blessing, I'm just here today to tell their story, be their storyteller, and share what we've learned from that summit. And I'm lucky enough that I get to be their witness. And those that were there will know what I mean by that. So, next slide, please. Okay, so we did have some limitations with this summit. There are 575 federally recognized tribes in the United States, and that's not including the hundreds of state recognized tribes as well. So, given the vast nature of Indian country, we were not able to have everybody, but we made an effort to ensure geographic representation from across the U.S. Some of these regions were underrepresented due to travel considerations and lack of contacts and limited space allowed at that summit. Another limitation was the difficulty of capturing the full breadth of unique and tribal protocols around grieving, which can vary significantly even with a single community. We all know that Indian country is vast and wide, and each tribe and community has their own protocols in grieving and unique experiences. So many of the ceremonies that were discussed during this summit are sacred. We will not be publicly disclosing or discussing those during this webinar today. Next slide, please. So we're going to go ahead and just talk about what we do know about grief and understanding of grief. So these are the top 3 definitions if you look up grief. And these are the top 3 definitions in the most popular dictionaries. So deep sorrow, especially that caused by someone's death. Very great sadness, especially at the death of someone. and deep and prominent stress caused by or as if by bereavement. But we know that grief is so much more than this. So much more. Um, so next slide, please. We have just various types of grief. We have anticipatory grief, the grief of something that hasn't happened yet. Disconnection, pain caused by disconnection from one's culture, community. Then you have complicated, which is intense, long-lasting, debilitating grief that disrupts daily life, where one can feel stuck and in pain and cannot move forward. Collective grief, large-scale loss by a community or nation, such as following of a natural disaster. And disenfranchised, losing something or someone in their life that is important to them, but either their loss is not valued or recognized by others, or a way they're grieving is not considered to be socially acceptable way of process grief. Later in this presentation, we're going to deep dive a little bit into that. And these various types of grief, when not processing, grieving, and healing properly, can lead to unhealthy grieving, which is something that we're going to be discussing into our second webinar. So stages of grief. This is the stages of grief that is the Kubler-Ross model, which is one of the most common models of grief, which is the stages of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And then later there was a sixth stage of meaning. Now, many believe that this is the order that grief goes in traditionally, and this is the correct order. But Kubler-Ross consistently emphasized that these stages were never meant to be rigid or sequenced. She clarified that individuals may move among stages, experience some of these simultaneously, or not experiencing these stages at all. But with tribal communities and tribal people, this doesn't really work. Alice and Kelly Associates, they were developing a healing with grief toolkit, and they presented this information as a slide to the elders in their community, and they explored this model. And the elders said that while these slides were partially useful, this is just not reflective of the grieving process within tribal communities. So what is? So we really looked into that. Next slide, please. So we've looked into some loss and grief from Native perspectives and how these differ. So for defining loss, for many Native communities, loss encompasses the physical absence of a person and broken connections to ancestral lands, community, and culture. Cultural loss includes the loss of traditional knowledge, Native languages, traditional practices and ceremonies, and way of life. And then for grief, the definition was profound, holistic, and deeply personal experience that affects individuals, families, and communities. It is often seen as a natural, spiritual, and transformative experience that connects individuals to their ancestors and to the spirit world. Many Native communities do not view grief as a problem to be fixed or healed, but as a journey to be navigated with support, cultural knowledge, and connection to community, ancestors, and land. So next slide, please. We also have spiritual dimension. Many Native communities see death as a transition within the circle of life and not an ending. The spirit of the deceased continues to exist and interact with the living. Collective grief is personal response to loss that is often experienced collectively in Native communities and where the entire community shares in the pain of their community members. And then cultural grief. Disruption of traditional knowledge, languages, practices, and ways of life passed down through generations may take the form of cultural grief. Now, I know everybody on here has experienced one of these griefs, if not many or all. And so, how do we grieve in a healthy way? How are we? Let's explore that and come. Yes, sorry, I got a little ahead of myself. We're not there yet. We're still going to talk about disenfranchised grief. See, I get a little bit stumbled. So, disenfranchised grief is something I worked really hard when I was making this slide because to me, these are areas of grief that are very represented. Um, Nowadays, I feel like there's not enough bereavement time and a time allowed when grieving in some of these categories. As of animals, to me, animals are people. My pets are my babies. I will do anything for them. So the loss of pets can be traumatically hard. Farm animals, um, is also loved ones, pets, food. So animals needed for food. And then, of course, our beloved resi dogs. And then with resources, the loss of plants, or someone's garden, farming and agriculture. I have that one starred, because farmers are 3.5 times more likely to die by suicide than the general population, according to the National Rural Health Association. So we know that farming and agriculture, you have a bad season and your crop is out, and that can just have a devastating loss. Um, Loss of trees and then water. I know lately nowadays, water and water pollution and losing of that has been very important. And then there's also grief from loss of a job or income, health and health scares, and that anticipatory grief that we talked about earlier. That's when that can really start to kick in. Relationship changing, and then grief of housing, losing housing or loss of housing or changing of that. And then past and future, again, anticipatory grief, and then nostalgia. Because I don't know about you, but I grieve a time that no longer exists. So I grieve like summertime in the 90s, just eating my bowl of cereal, watching the morning cartoons before social media and cell phones and all that. It's time that is no longer possible. And I grieve nostalgia. In the 70s, yes. I wasn't in the 70s, but if I could go back, I would. But then we also have complicated grief, which sometimes is the least amount talks about. So we have suicide, overdose, domestic violence, and murder. And sometimes the way the community responds to how one died might be by suicide or overdose. It might be different how they respond if somebody died by one of these ways versus maybe a car accident. But the protocols for burial are the same, regardless of how the cause of death. And so even though, oh, sorry. So even though it might not be the same ritual, they're going to deal with the grief internally the same. And so that is just always how the community responds to that. Can vary. And then we have compounded, where you could have one of these, two of these, or multiple of these happening at the same time. And then I know with the economic, I didn't really touch on that too much. I didn't put this on here, but caretaker needs with the anticipatory grief. Many of the families rely on their family as sole caretakers. And those folks might not be trained or educated in areas of grief or when it comes to medical or physical needs. And so sometimes many are navigating trying to care for their elders while raising children at the same time, and then all of this. And so just to look at it and know that there are many, many types of ways that we can grieve. That's just not the loss of a loved one. It can be various ways that we're feeling that. Next slide, please. Okay, so grieving experiences are very personal and unique. There is not just one way to grieve, just like there's not just one way to live. We can learn from our relatives and ancestors about healthy grieving practices so that when we experience loss and trauma, we can be confronted by others and their stories. Next slide. All right, traditions and ceremonial practices. So these are common practices which can vary significantly within a tribal community. These do not apply to all. So best rule of thumb is to seek guidance from the community that you're working with. And then many of the ceremonies and practices that were utilized by our summit participants are sacred practices. And then again, therefore, will not be disclosed or discussed, but these are common practices. So grief in tribal communities is deeply communal, spirited, and rooted in both shared and tribe-specific rituals, honoring the deceased and guiding their journey to the spirit world. So in this section, we're going to discuss some traditional customs, variants in practices across tribes, evolving practices, and then barriers to supporting and grieving the process. Next slide, please. Sorry, excuse me. So, some traditional observances that we were discussed, I kind of broke them down into four categories. So, for belongings, some of the ceremonial practices and observances were belongings were given away. So, some families gave away personal belongings of the deceased in order to honor them. With their belongings, some of artifacts and belongings would be gifted to other family members or somebody in the tribe so that they can continue the practice or the craft. So regalia and tools were gifted away. With some cultures, the person's personal items were destroyed or burned so as to not hold back that person so that they can transition on. And that also helped with the family not holding on to that person as well. So then with speaking, storytelling, lots of folks that were at our summit talked about storytelling and sharing those stories of the departed person. But then we had some that they don't talk about death or say the name of the deceased. So the deceased isn't spoken about for a certain periods of time. Some of the tribes didn't have a word for death. Instead, the person went to sleep or never woke up, or they journeyed on. And then on a lot that we heard was there were many, many tribes that didn't have a word for suicide in their language. And so, in saying the word suicide can be very scary when that's not something that's commonly spoken about within those communities. And so, the need for suicide training is much needed just to get around some of those barriers. And then laughter, humor. Laughter and humor is just seen as a way to get through that grieving period when speaking of loved ones. So then on personal, one may cut their hair. For many, hair holds ties to one's spirit and history. And this cutting of the hair is an outward expression of deep mourning and loss and that they have experienced. And is symbolic to the transition manifesting within their life. And then we also have wearing the color red. And this is just like one of the great examples, I feel, just of like how diverse all the different tribes are and how, some of the tribes of the members that were there cut hair and some, gave away options. But the color red was one that was had a lot of conversation about it because some tribes avoid certain colors during the grieving period, while others embrace it. And the color red was a prime example of this divide. So some believe it's the only color their ancestors see, which makes it an integral part of mourning, while others avoided red during the same time frame, believing it draws the spirit back and it interferes with the spirit's ability to move on. And so something just as a color can have such a different meaning with just different communities. And then opening doors and windows. When the person passes, they open the doors and windows to release the spirit. And some communities, images and photos are taken down after that person has passed. And so then we also have some ceremonial um, observances that were discussed throughout. Healing fires used to carry prayers of smoke or dry tobacco to carry the thoughts and prayers of the grieving. Um, Planting tobacco is commonly placed at graves to direct offering to the departed spirit and ask for their safe passage. And then we have a crying ceremony or wiping of the tears ceremony, which is communal gathering that allows members to share stories of loss and release collective trauma. And then spirit plate, which is an offering of food that's usually left in a specific public place so that it's to help ancestors sustain a loved one as they journey on to the spirit realm. So these were just some of the traditional observances that we discussed about and I learned about during this summit. Next slide, please. Oh,
Before we move
sorry,
on,
Scott.
yeah,
Yes.
before we move on, can you go back to that slide for a second? I just wanted to add that this is particularly was interesting to us, not only as facilitators, but also to the participants, in that a lot of tribal folks do not know what the observances, ceremonial meanings, and why a lot of these things are done in their communities. So it was important for us to not only get this information and get it out there, because it will also help the tribal folks that are may not be as connected with either their community, whether they're urban or just disconnected, or we're just never taught these observances and these ceremonies. So I just wanted to add that's why this is particularly important for us.
Thank you, Scott. Okay. And we also had a lot of discussion about time-honored ceremonies. And as I was going back and looking at it, it seemed that a lot of the ceremonies took place around 4 days a year in anniversary time. Not all of them, but the majority. And so I was really going to highlight on those. So for 4 days, some tribes will light a fire for 4 days for a fire ceremony. Um, they'll light it at sunrise, and the fire is never left unattended for those 4 days. And then after those 4 days of mourning, the family is encouraged to return to a normal routine and then focus back on the living. Some would say that the spirit stays for 4 days. And then for 1 year, some tribes, the grieving process is for 1 year, and this allows mourning through the seasons of life. So spring, summer, fall, and then winter. And then 1 year allows the family to mourn, um, and then they hold a ceremony after a year of grieving. Some of the tribes that we spoke with, they had some singing ceremonies. Some had dancing. We had some that did not have dancing but did have singing. So those varied on what kind of ceremony that they would have at the 1 year mark. Excuse me. And then adoption. There was a tribe that we spoke about, which if a mother loses a child on the 1 year anniversary, they will have an adoption for that mother if she would like to adopt another child, and that's done at a year. And I loved that. And then the anniversary. Anniversary is very important to honor the loved one. So once a year, and then every 4 years, one tribe, a mourning song would occur, and the family would honor their loved ones. On the yearly anniversary of death, someone placed tobacco at their resting place. And then gift giving around the year was really important to acknowledge the loss. But then one thing that was really common is after these ceremonies and after the visiting time, that's where families really needed the most support, was when they were left alone. And so we're going to talk a little bit about showing support during those times. Next slide, please. Okay, we have sobriety expectations. During a lot of these ceremonies, sobriety is expected within many communities. And that can be very difficult for those that are struggling with addiction. And that can lead to some also unhealthy grieving techniques as well.
Party.
And practices do vary. Some tribes now allow alcohol post barrier, while others still remain a strict ceremonial absence from it. Next slide, please. So let's go through some barriers of supporting those who are grieving. Some common barriers that we ran into were some language and food. So some tribes are losing their language, and language is a valuable tool for grief and continuing of storytelling. And there have been losses in foods recipes during certain times due to health restraints like diabetes, and some recipes have to be modified. And and then it's also hard to translate some of those recipes into the English language of today. And so really staying true to that language and learning it was really important with supporting grief. And then with burial, so burial, it used to be back then that nobody ever took body to a funeral home. So preparation of body was done at your house, and that has changed. Um, and so we've talked about a lot of our attendees talked about just the financial constraints of stopping people from fully participating in cultural activities. Because nobody really talks about the money and financial aspects of the grieving process. I mean, it takes a lot to pay for that process. And some tribes have bereavement funds set aside, but some also do not. And so the financial constraints can really change how one would go about the burial process. And then also, if there's an investigation into one's death, that can take several days before receiving the body. And when with Native folks, a lot of these ceremonies were done within those 4 days. And so that can really restrict and add a lot of stress when it comes to that process. So with location, physical distance between families can be challenging because it hinders their ability to help. And then some urban environments that can hinder traditional practices. There might be sometimes cemetery zoning issues, and then some cemeteries on personal land. We had somebody who was talking about the grave site was now being closed and it's now located on personal land and they have to get special permission to visit. Um, and they're literally not allowed. So one of our participants at the summit used to go and say prayers and leave some tobacco, and then has since been threatened as a trespasser and is no longer allowed on the property. So a lot of those locations can also be a huge factor as well of going to see those loved ones. And then bereavement, reduced time for bereavement. So grieving for traditional um, families and cultures is an extended period of time, and most organizations and jobs nowadays have a very short bereavement that doesn't necessarily co-align with what one's culture and beliefs are. So using bereavement to get off from work or school can be very difficult, and lack of understanding from some of these institutions about taking off, there's just some misunderstandings there. And there's just a broader awareness, I think, of bringing aware of the sacred nature and time commitment of some of these grieving practices within Native cultures. Next slide. Okay, so some common misunderstandings. And this we kind of went over a little bit earlier, but I just wanted to talk about it and highlight it once again, is cutting of one's hair. So hair holds ties to one's spirit and history. And I can tell you that I have been misunderstood about this. Like these traditions provide meaning and healing, and they're often misunderstood or disrespected by outside systems. So our participants highlighted the importance of respect and education to bring these gaps in mourning and ways of mourning to light. I have been accused. I've done this before where I've went to somebody and said, "Oh, I love your haircut. It just keeps getting shorter and shorter." And their response was, "Yes, I just have people around me that keep dying." And it was like, "Oh, I didn't think of it that way, you know?" And that really hit home. And um, so cutting of one's hair is a common misunderstanding. Not saying thank you when someone brings food, gifts, or medicine or offerings. In some traditions, gift giving is based on sharing and communal support rather than obligation. So when somebody brings food to help a grieving family, it's an expression of love and community care. And the recipient might accept this graciously without saying words as a verbal thanks. Sometimes verbally saying thanks can create a sense of debt, whereas a silent acceptance signifies a natural reciprocal relationship. And then the same with gifts being returned. Some might not accept that gift, and it might be returned without words. And then not speaking the name of the deceased, which we spoke about earlier. Um, that can be a common misunderstanding with some, and not understanding why that person doesn't speak the name of their loved ones anymore. rituals around eclipses, lightning strikes, and fires. Those are often dismissed or ignored. And then humor is coping was a really big one. So in many communities, humor is meant to like navigate the aftermath of death. It's a crucial coping mechanism to help provide a safe way of grieving. Humor can help people feel acknowledged and normalize their grief. And that can be sometimes misunderstood as well. Miss Scott, did you have anything? You're good.
Nope, you're doing great.
Thank you. Next slide, please. All right. So showing support during grief. So grief is shared collectively in tribal communities. It's deeply communal, historical, connected to land and culture and identity. So we're going to go over approaching a community that is not your own tribe when there is a loss. We'll talk about some community acts of support and then guidelines for discussions on grief in Native communities. Next slide, please. So approaching communities, number one, get a motorcycle because I think anybody with a motorcycle, yes, thank you. You just look cool, right? So get a motorcycle, but ask to speak to a knowledge keeper to understand the traditions of the family. Just respect, ask to learn, and then practice some humility. And don't participate, just observe. So if you don't know, just be there as a silent supporter and then ask questions about clothing, expectations, community norms, what is appropriate to wear, things of that questions that you just might not know. And then be cautious of spaces for family community members versus not family community members. So people who come to provide support, many times non-family members, for example, like pay their respects and then they may stay outside of the home. So if you're unsure, just ask questions before. And then acts of community support. So we have some small gestures, like gifting medicine. It's comfort and healing. It is often given as a medicine to provide comfort for those experiencing hardship and loss or trauma. And then making support bags. This is something me and my friends do to each other a lot. It's just little gift bags, goodie bags with some of our favorite treats or candy, maybe a smelling candle or some sage. We love doing that. A handwritten card of just telling them that they're there and they have support and they are loved. Meal trains, setting up meal trains. I mean, everybody loves food. And we all know that food is an important part of healing and grieving. And then sitting, just the power of presence and silence can be enough. It's silent presence in emotional space is often more helpful than verbal condolences and just being there. Then you can also offer traditional spiritual support, by taking them to a natural space. Oh, I'm so sorry. I have notes. Or singing traditional songs, having a talking circle, or sweat, or going to a sweat lodge. I just love being outdoors is my happy space. It's where I feel most grounded and comfort. And so just being out in nature, it just does wonders for me. And then you can also offer support in the physical sense by cleaning, mowing yards, helping with preparing meals and some childcare, or bringing food. So a lot of these categories kind of get put on the back burner when we're grieving and we're working with the process of, burial and that. And so helping out with those just can make a wonder, and really support somebody. And then there are needs for more structured support, including grief counseling, resources from the tribe, and clear guidance during mourning. And that's really what our focus was when getting everybody together to participate in this summit so that we can provide more resources on these topics and provide them for the tribes. Next slide, please. So some guidelines for discussions on discussing about grief in Native communities. So first is just create a safe space. We really focused on that when we had the summit. We really wanted to have it on tribal lands, um, in a tribal cultural center. So we were so lucky to have it at the Matching Pequot Cultural Center. And then just created a safe space. While we had it, we also had wellness rooms. So if people needed to step away and take a break, we offered medicines and sage so that they needed some time for themselves. So creating a safe space will really encourage people to get those conversation going and active listening. So once you get that safe space, encourage participants to listen and seek to understand the diverse perspectives. From the slides that we've shown, we've seen that there's so much diversity just within the tribes on these different traditions and ceremonies, how they can range so much between one tribe and another. And then have cultural humility. Approach the discussion with a willingness to learn and acknowledge the limits of your own knowledge. Have respectful language and use inclusive language when possible. And then Native leadership. Ensure discussions center on Native voices and include Native elders and knowledge keepers when appropriate. And then take actionable steps. Identify additional steps you can take to improve support for Native American communities that are experiencing grief. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, so we're closing. We move forward with clear direction. We must invest in tailored post-mention resources, build trust and capacity within Native communities, and amplify Indigenous voices in all aspects of suicide prevention and grief support. Grieving is not linear or individual experience in tribal communities. It is spiritual, communal, and intergenerational. Honoring that truth will be essential as we walk together toward healing, resilience, and cultural continuity. Thank you. Next slide, please. Woo! Next. We got through it. So, oh, can you go back to the next? What's next? Sorry. Thank you so much. So, we would really love to know how we did. This was my very first webinar presenting by myself. So, I would really like to know what you thought of it. So, we are committed to understanding how we can best meet the needs of the suicide prevention field. And I really like to hear your thoughts on today's session. So, please be on the lookout for an email request from our evaluator, Michelle Cummings. She's going to ask you to take just a couple of minutes to provide feedback so that we can help our efforts and just get better growing in the future. So be on the lookout for that. And then next slide, please. So you guys get a sneak peek. So we're not going to we're not marketing this for a few weeks, but we would love for you to go ahead and register early for webinar 2. So webinar 2, we're going to talk about traditional practices for healthy grieving. So we are really going to be discussing insight on ways Indigenous traditions and values can foster healing after loss. We're going to recognize signs and impacts of unhealthy, unresolved, or complicated grief within individuals and communities. And then we're going to identify practices and community-based approaches that can promote healthy grieving and emotional well-being. So that will all take place in webinar 2, which will be September 17th at 1 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Eastern. So there's this QR code that you can scan to register, or we will also be sending an email out with the registration link as well. We hope that you register for webinar 2. And then again, thank you so much. It was great to see new faces, old faces, and thank you for supporting us.